What does it feel like to not feel real? To ponder whether or not reality and one's life actually interact with one another. Do my decisions, all that have led up to this moment as well as those to come, actually impact the course of time? These are all questions that exist within existential thought. They are such that make one wonder what's real and what isn't. These are thoughts that bombard the human mind in waves rather than a one-time occurrence. This process, or more so processes, are under the umbrella of a concept known as existential thought. It is believed to be the central trigger for most common mental illnesses. Now, regardless of how the statistics may lie, there are always outliers, and any plethora of emotions, feelings, and impulses can be influenced by a number of things. And although existential thought is frequently associated with the middle of one's life, an existential crisis can be experienced by a vast range of age groups and can present its effects in a variety of ways. A contributor to this association to middle age groups is simply the fact that humor is made about it. However insensitive and cruel, middle-aged men are popularly depicted to experience an existential crisis as if it were a joke for the masses. In reality, existential thought is something that shows in children as early as 5 years old and is present in people as old as sliced bread. Merely questioning the meaning of one's life is considered an existential thought. When one tries to understand and comprehend the reality and scope of life, existential thought takes place. Presented in this matter, being existential seems far more believable in a wider spectrum of people groups. Although it is associated with negative and adverse outcomes, I feel as though these existential thoughts should be encouraged because they lead to a better sense of self-awareness and improved understanding of reality, and they are shown to influence a more clear and logical thought process in those who frequently think this way. Background information. To understand what existential thinking and philosophy actually means, you must look further into its history. Existentialism is often linked to depression and overall contemplation of reality. So to understand existential thinking, you should also be knowledgeable of depression and its origins. At its base level, depression or major depressive disorder is a popular and severe mental illness that negatively affects how one feels, how one thinks, and how one acts. Although rather broad and indescript, this definition allows for the idea of feeling depressed to apply to many different causes. Looking further back in history, the term depression used to be known as melancholia. Accounts of this word date as far back as 2nd millennium BC. Therefore, there has been plenty reason to feel depressed since the oldest documented civilization, Mesopotamia. Depression has existed for thousands of years. However, the word existential didn't start appearing in the connotation that we associate it with today until 1937, appearing in the works of Kierkegaard, in turn creating an entire philosophy in which our existence is indefinitely temporary and that time will continue to move regardless of whether we are ready or not. And at its heart, this philosophy is ultimately a good one to have if the person does not fear anything in life, but most people are not fearless. Where the data lies. Out of a survey of adults ranging from ages 29 to 56, statistics show that 67.9% of them stated that they had been through an existential crisis at some point in life. Going based on this data, most would assume that all of these people experienced their crises after entering adulthood. However, further research shows that a majority of this experiencing is attributed to overcoming developmental milestones, specifically puberty, the challenges of which are notorious for inciting a cornucopia of potential mental health issues either during adolescence or later on in life. In addition to this, the likelihood of feeling this existential muck is far greater for children with more than average intelligence. This is attributed to a gifted individual's higher chance of being far more mature and more focused than their peers. Children with an above average intelligence oftentimes are more idealistic and intensive, causing them to contemplate their existence way earlier than others. What's the point? The importance of existential thinking is blurry and vague for most, but for many others, these thoughts are a driving force in their lives. Millions of people go day to day thinking in an existential matter, maybe due to unforeseen events or a traumatic experience, although that is assuming that these feelings were not by their own choice. What if one chooses to think in an existential way? What does it look like? Chances are most people have heard the saying, live every day like it's your last. If you really think about it, this saying is a fantastic example of existential philosophy. As stated previously, existential thinking is just a way of thinking that circles around one's existence and mortality, which quite literally is the focal point of this phrase. It tries to push the listener to become comfortable with their own mortality and use it as a motivation to achieve their goals in life. The famous astronomer Neil deGrasse Tyson, when talking about immortality, once said, "It is the knowledge that I'm going to die that creates the focus that I bring to being alive, the urgency of accomplishment, the need to express love, now, not later. If we live forever, why ever even get out of bed in the morning? Because you will always have tomorrow. That's not the kind of life I want to lead." Although he is speaking in regards to a concept that exists only within fiction, pieces of his own existential thought poke through his reasoning. Existentialism also shows benefits in other ways. Being able to understand one's existence is crucial to further comprehending reality itself. Exploring this philosophy has shown to encourage development in not only mental growth, but also physical growth as well. It helps create meaning in people's lives. Through the awareness of one's personal freedom and choice, complex emotions, anxiety, depression, etc., can be mitigated. Being able to cope and handle dread are certainly attributed to a stable train of thought and mind, which can be caused by transitioning to a more existential mindset. Having the constant acknowledgement of one's own mortality deem a vast majority of trivial upsets as exactly what they are, trivial. This thereby allowing one to overcome all obstacles that are in the way of true happiness. In addition, thinking in this sort of way emphasizes a focus on appreciate what life one does have rather than dwelling upon it, and in the event that one does dwell upon this notion, the overall awareness of one's life being only temporary will motivate said person to strive to achieve a higher quality of whatever it is they may be dwelling upon. In most scenarios that I can think of, implementing an existential way of thought not only solves most personal dilemmas, but in the instance in which it does not do so, it still leads to an outstanding solution. One could even say that existential philosophy is both the solution to life's woes and the precautionary action taken to prevent more issues in the future. In my personal opinion, existential thought is a door to a furtherment of self-understanding first and foremost. The beautiful aspect of it all is that it makes one question about the world, about life, but most importantly, about themselves. An undeniable fact is that for one to truly change, they must first want to change. Then they must understand how to do so. Questioning every single little thing about oneself, venturing into the deepest and most sacred parts of one's being, is a catalyst for change. Now, this is assuming that someone is seeking a change in themselves or their lives. However, this can apply to someone who isn't seeking either of those things. To put it simply, a better understanding of oneself is generally considered healthy, hence the reason for many therapists to recommend a client to consider what many refer to as soul-searching. A vast number of therapists find that this is an effective method. But when genuinely thought upon, soul-searching is just another way of contemplating one's own existence. So in a way, I understand that I am basing this idea on purely speculation. A large amount of therapists are technically suggesting and recommending that people should adopt an existential mindset, be it only for a brief period of time, but they still recommend to people in need of mental health assistance. Why should anyone think like this? Although I could continue to go on and on about the benefits of an existential philosophy and that existentialism is the answer to life's problems, there are still some genuine concerns about whether this type of thought should be recommended for people of ages and whether or not this should even be considered healthy to do frequently. In the midsections of a lot of people's lives, they are often pushed into an existential crisis, which is often extremely damaging. These midlife crises were often responsible for about 198 suicides in that window of age during the medieval period. Although these statistics are based on information from hundreds of years ago, this still shows that this type of thought process is certainly not beneficial when people are forced into it. Traumatic experiences, drastic changes in their lives, and even just the movement of time itself are all things that can push someone into an existential crisis. All of this has contributed to the negative worldview of this philosophy. However, there are still mounds of positives that come with an existential way of thinking. That is, if people choose to think that way rather than adopt it against their own will. With this in mind, I still genuinely believe that an existential thought process should be encouraged in all groups of people. It is shown that a realistic and existential philosophy is beneficial when conceptualized in the proper way. Despite its downsides and its risks, a mutual existential philosophy amongst the majority of society would ultimately change the world itself. However, there is the thought that living one's ideal life at all costs would cause conflicts. For instance, a power-hungry tyrant could justify being terrible as it being their ideal life. But that is beside the point, considering that I am trying to explicitly talk in regards to personal mental health rather than something at such a large scale. At the heart of it all, from a midlife crisis to the fuel that powers the machine of everyday life, existential thought plays an important factor in the lives of all people. Whether for good or for bad, it crosses all of our minds from time to time. And however it normally negatively affects our mood, the benefits of choosing to think in a way that thrives on an existential philosophy are astounding. Therefore, in my personal opinion, existential thought should be encouraged in all age groups with the regard that it is conceptualized and applied from a perspective that is driven by hope. Not only can this bring a healthier mindset to the masses, but it may even incite a generation of people who are more aware of everything. Existentialism is a gleaming beacon in the sky, shining in the hopes that those who are lost may eventually find their way through the haze of life.